am I not wearing a Need More Pussy shirt? Why? Why? One of the first tweets I ever read from you was something like, this summer, like, I'm going on boats, I'm making 50K, and I'm gonna eat all the pussy in the world. And I was like, I need to know this person. I need to sit down with this person.
Wow, and now that you have said that, that is pretty much exactly what I have done this entire summer. So my goals have been met. Exactly. Check that shit out.
Today, I got to sit down with one of the powerhouses in our industry. Raquel is a sex coach. She has an incredible Patreon with tons of sexual education content, and she is a very recently retired full-service sex worker. We got to chat all aspects of the sex industry, everything from creating a sales funnel when you don't have access to a space like the club to bring in all your customers for you, what it looks like to network as professional sex workers, what it looks like for us to create a really healthy and productive dialogue within the industry and across different forms of sex work. And we got to chat retirement strategies, mentorship in the world of personal financial management, and how we can build more resources for that area. We also had a fascinating conversation about what sex coaching is, why mental health care is so important in our industry, and what to do if you are looking for qualified resources in that area, no matter where you are in the world. So without further ado, here's the entire conversation. Please don't forget to follow Raquel on all her platforms. And if you like these interviews and this content, go ahead and subscribe and comment below.
For someone who's never met you or come across your platform before, what should they know about you?
Sure. So I always start with that I am a sex coach, sex educator, and sex worker. So in terms of the sex coaching and education part, my background is in therapy. So I have a master's in counseling, and I do regular like mental health therapy. But then I have a focus in sex related topics and trauma. So I do a lot of trauma informed care as well. In terms of sex work, I'm a just recently former full-service sex worker, and then I still create content online. I have an Onlyfans, and I've been doing that since, like I said, 2013, I think. And then the sex coaching, sex education has been really my whole life, but like more professionally since 2015.
Okay. And how did that interest begin? How did you get started in, sex coaching? In our industry, I think that sounds very like, yeah, of course, we need more of that. For most people, that's like, what? You do what? You need coaching in what?
Well, let me first just say that for people who aren't familiar with what sex coaching is, it's really like mental health counseling and therapy, just with a side of my knowledge in anything related to sex, sexuality, reproductive health, anatomy, intimacy, dating, all of that shit. So it's really like an informal version of therapy. I think when some people hear sex coaching, regardless of the other context that I give them, they just think that I'm like fucking people. And then if they also find out that I'm a sex worker, they're like, for sure, sex coaching is just like you sucking a lot of dick. And I'm like, that's actually not at all what this is. So they're two completely different and separate things. And for ethical reasons, anybody who I do any sex coaching with or therapy with, for that matter, there is no sexual relationship at all. So I just want to clarify that first.
Yeah, and that's great. Because that's super important. I wanted to ask you about those differences too, because like you mentioned, like sex. So for example, in my head, when I imagine sex coach, right, I think of someone who's walking you through maybe processes, who maybe you can't do this or this with your body. And you know, I imagine sort of like a convention center, right? And there's like up front, but there's obviously one very tiny slice of what a sex coach does, what a professional and a therapist does. So where in that spectrum do you fall in, and what other types of sex coaching and sex therapy do people approach you thinking like that's what you do?
Yeah, so when I do sex coaching, it really is very informal style of therapy. And when I say informal, I just mean that it's therapy, except I'm not using the word therapy because because I'm a sex worker, I have a lot of like, I don't want to say nerves, but you know, there's a lot of bureaucracy in terms of guidelines and licensure and all of that shit. And I don't know that falling under that umbrella feels safe to me as also being a sex worker. So I've chosen the term sex coach for that reason. But I'm doing mental health counseling, like essentially. And we're going to be touching on whatever is coming up for you, whether it's anxiety, depression, and almost everyone's shit in some way plays into sex, sexuality, anatomy, dating, love, their body image, whatever. So that always comes up. So my knowledge in that is important and useful. And then everyone, no matter if it's about sex or not, has trauma stuff. And so anything sex coaching related is basically therapy. And then other than that, and so when I'm doing therapy with people, when I'm doing coaching with people, I'm not giving advice. I'm not giving suggestions. I'm not saying, here's what I think, here's my lived experience. No. So just like any other therapist, I'm allowing you to speak. I'm going to guide you through whatever you're going through. I'm going to help you find suggestions for yourself, because it's like not ethical for me to be like, well, girl, in my life, I do like, no. So that's that portion of coaching. And then when I'm doing educational stuff, I'm much more casual with what I say, and I'll add in my lived experience, and I'm talking about a number of things depending on the topic. And then so like other than that, there are people who are considered sex therapists, which is very similar to me, except they have like the licensure and whatever like very clinical credentials they need to have. And then there are people who are sex surrogates who actually do have sex with people, but it's for clinical reasons only. So it's different from a full service sex worker, for instance, who it's like, we're fucking because you want to fuck. And sex surrogates, it's like maybe you have anxiety or maybe you have a disability or something, and I'm walking you through that process. I don't do that, but I'm just giving some context for other people in sex industry.
So I have a question about one of the things you said, which was the ability to listen, right? That most of what you do when you're trying to be helpful to someone is listen and take information. How was that? Was that a process learning how to listen in that way?
Was it a process? To be honest, so the family that I was raised in is and I didn't really know this growing up, but now looking back, I realize it's very, I guess, radical and progressive and forward thinking and very teaching me about autonomy and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things, my grandfather, who was a Methodist minister, but he was like super like fucking wanted gay people to be able to get married. He advocated for women clergy in the church. Like he was like, I don't know, he was a fucking radical. His thing was all about questioning in a way that allows people to lead to their own answers. And he would do that with me all the time when I was younger. And I didn't even know he was doing it. Like we'd be having a conversation and I'd be like, you give the best advice, but really he was just asking me questions that allowed me to explore my own options and come to my own decision and provide clarity for me. So I really use that as my listening skill. And that was like kind of just inherently in me from that experience. And that's what I do really when I'm doing therapy. So I'm listening and I'm listening generally, but I'm also listening to respond, to be able to ask you questions that will allow you to kind of dig deeper in your own shit, as opposed to me giving you the answers, which can be really hard sometimes, because sometimes I do have the answers, you know what I mean? But it's, when it comes to like therapeutic stuff, it's not about me giving you the answers, it's about me kind of helping you and giving you the tools and whatever to figure shit out on your own. So I don't think it's really that hard to listen. And honestly, I think sometimes for me, as someone who's always expected to have answers and always expected to be like, oh, I know this and let me tell you about this, it's kind of nice for me to just take the role of listening and not giving, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Is there any crossover between those two worlds, right? Between the sex coach work and what you're doing in this space and people who are either other service providers or who are customers?
Yeah, so I would say that there are a lot of sex workers, regardless of what part of the industry people work in, who need and would like to access mental health services. But unfortunately, so many therapists and community centers or whatever resources people are attempting to use are not sex worker friendly or are just not accessible, whether it be for cost or whatever other reason. So I find that what has been like a thing for me is that being both a therapist, a mental health care provider, and a sex worker is learning that there is such a need for mental health services for sex workers, and that I can be that person. I can treat you from the perspective of having a clinical background, and I can also approach you without judgment about your work. And I think that a lot of therapists, and even in my master's program, I remember so much of the conversation around sex work being that it's conflated with trafficking, right? Or not understand the nuance of survival and empowerment, or that it overlaps, or, all types of shit. A lot of sex workers basically need mental health care, and I'm happy that I can be someone who is a safe provider for that, being both a sex coach and sex worker. And that's the majority of the overlap that I see, I guess. And then there also are so many sex workers who are also professionals in terms of having either like 2 jobs, and one of them being therapists, or maybe teachers, or whatever. So that's also interesting for me too. And some of those people are not sex workers who are out, but just that there is a misconception that people who are sex workers cannot or do not have multi-layered lives. It's so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the question, right? What's your real job? Like, it assumes that sex work in itself is not a multifaceted process.
Right.
So many different areas where you have to pull in expertise, research,
absolutely,
a lot of times on your own without a support structure. So
absolutely.
For people in that space, because that's, I 100% agree with you. I've seen it all over the country in every side of the industry. This very real need for great therapy and great resources that's met with a lot of skepticism, a lot of stigma, a lot of just misconceptions for people who maybe can't get access to you, or don't live in a major market like Miami or Atlanta or LA. What are some resources? What are some places where they can start looking?
The thing is, I just want to be very transparent that trying to access mental health services, no matter if you're a sex worker or not, is so shitty, and it's a lot of bullshit. And I just want to be very transparent about that is very real, and that it's, and I believe, and this is like separate, but I believe that is intentional, right? That of course access to healthcare and being able to be fucking sane is like reserved for only a certain class of people. But so I would say that if you are not even able to access that at all, which is many people, trying your best to build support and community with the people that you do have can be so vital and useful. I think that so many of us as sex workers feel isolated and feel like we don't have anybody, and that like adds to and makes you more vulnerable for being traumatized or being unhappy or being unsafe or whatever the case may be. So doing your best to try to build a community or support system of some sort, and that can involve doing that with other sex workers or non-sex workers, and then kind of discerning who it's safe to disclose to or not. And I think it's okay for people to recognize that your support system can be a bunch of different kind of people, in which you choose who you can share your full self with or not, and you could still benefit from that relationship in some way. So maybe some people you can't tell that you're a sex worker, however they provide really good emotional support about something, I don't know, that's important to you. So kind of figuring out who can be in your circle that will fucking help you out and be a good support system for you. I think that that's really important if you just don't have access to these resources that most people or other people have access to. But other than that, getting online, if you have access to the internet, getting online, going to community centers, of course, making sure that you're like aware of whether or not you can disclose if you're a sex worker or not, because sometimes you can't, and then deciding whether or not you still want to move forward with whatever resource that is. Because I totally understand, like, oh, I want to go get therapy, but I'm not going to be able to talk about my sex work. Sex work is a huge part of my life. It is my life. How is this going to be useful? Kind of picking and choosing what will and will not work. And also for me, so of course I have sex coaching sessions, but also you mentioned my Patreon earlier. My Patreon, I believe, and I like to think that it is therapeutic in terms of it allows you to access some content that will help you to reflect and help you to have some introspection, or help you, give you tools to do some things that would be therapeutic outside of the actual, an actual session, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that you put in a couple things that are so valuable for people to check out. Like, one thing that really got me is that compartmentalization feeling that we have, and how real that is to sex workers, that
Yeah.
you have people in your life who know you and have known you since you were a kid and that you love to death, and they don't know this whole part of your life.
Right.
And that it's okay to be frustrated by that, and it's okay to be upset by it, and it's okay to feel
Yes.
feelings. You're not wrong, and also you're not alone. Like, I think we all have had
Yeah. For
and
sure.
and the second thing was about accessing online spaces. I think that's 100% true when you're struggling with that, and with that whole just bullshit system of trying to get access to mental health care.
Yeah.
Even if you have insurance, even if you have this, you might have to try 4, 5, 6 people, right? At that point,
Yes.
it can be so frustrating. Like, realizing that you have other resources is crucial for a lot of people. And I think sometimes we don't treat that as mental health care, because we see it as like, if we're not paying for it and it's not within this very clinical model, it's not
Right.
healthcare. Not true.
Right.
Like, you can do healthcare in so many other spaces, and sometimes we need to, like, in our just
Correct.
survive in this industry, you know.
Correct. Absolutely.
Next, we'll transition sort of into the retirement and the sex work part of things, but
Say that retirement has been on my mind because I just recently retired. So I do think that is, now that I am in that space, that is something in an area that I feel like amongst sex workers, we could be having more conversation about that transition and how to prepare for that, and what that even looks like. So I don't know what you want to talk about that, but that's,
so you retired like a week ago.
yeah, August 1st. Yeah, so I retired specifically from full service sex work, so I'm still doing like Onlyfans and stuff, but yeah, August 1st, I told myself that is going to be my retirement, and we're done. And I think what has been interesting for me, and I think could be useful points of reflection for other people, first and foremost is me trying to figure out how I am now going to navigate relationships and encounters with men. So, because for a very long time, I only engaged with men if there was a monetary benefit. And in some way, I tied value to that, which made it a part of my identity, if that makes sense. So retirement isn't just like I'm quitting a job. It's like I'm cutting off a portion of my identity, if that makes any sense at all. So it's like part of my value was like, oh, well, every time I am with a man, he's going to give me money. He's going to pay my rent. And it's like, now I have to approach relationships not like that. So what am I saying to myself about myself, if that makes sense? And so it's like all of these I statements that are coming up, like, so now I'm a free hoe? Does that make me like, I don't know. So there's been like a lot of reflection on redefining my value and worth and what that means in terms of my proximity to men. And then also there's like this thing of like, what do I need to feel like my interactions with men are benefiting me? Because I would say, like, before I started sex work, I was in college and high school, and I was doing what most women who have sex with cishet men do, which is like, whatever they want to do, I'll do it. And there was like no I in that, you know, or like I wasn't able to really negotiate ethical like sex encounters. Like I was just having sex and not having orgasms, and I was like, whatever, I'm getting attention, you know. So like now that I'm older and on the other end of both sex work and like being more specific about my demands, there's also this space of like, what do I really want? And that can vary from, you know, encounter to encounter, a person to person, but just that is so different from sex work, because full service sex work, because that is just like, all right, he's paying my rate, whatever he wants to do, we'll do. And maybe I will demand it, or maybe I won't, depending on the vibe, but either way, I'm walking away with the check. So now it's like, I'm not walking away with the check. So what do I really need here? Right. And honestly, it's going to be a long process, but I think those things are good things for people to be thinking about, whether they're retiring or not, because a lot of it has to do with self. It's like a lot of values shit. And I see a lot, and I've been trying my best to stop doing this recently, not just because of retirement, but just generally, stop being the type of sex worker who's like braggy about the fact that I get money from people, because I've been trying to kind of reframe how I make sense of that, because like my privilege as a light-skinned, conventionally attractive, whatever person, I'm already going to be able to negotiate more ethical shit than someone who is not. You know what I'm saying? So I'm trying to like reframe how I think of everyone who engages cishet men, and understanding that just because I could negotiate this doesn't mean someone else is able to. And if they can't, that's okay. You know, it's just like, it's been a lot of like reflection shit. Retirement really needs to be a subject that I feel like, and there's like all of that, like emotional part of it. And then of course there's like the monetary part, which is totally separate. It's like saving up and what are you going to do and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and we'll definitely chat about the monetary part, because that's something I'm fascinated by. I think we don't do a great job talking about it, planning for it, and we see the revolving door of like the retirement, which is very frustrating for the person dealing with it. And unfortunately, the response within the community is often that like,
right.
Yeah, you said you were going to be gone. I see you. Right. And a lot of times that can be, it can be a source of like, camaraderie, but the reality for someone who's like really doesn't want to be in the industry anymore sucks. Right. So talking about that planning and that strategizing, super important. And I want to get to that next, but I want to ask you one more question about that. What are some of the patterns or habits that you see yourself that you reach for that maybe you go, oh, that's not something I'm doing anymore, right? What things are you like, I kind of miss that, or, nope, redirect.
Yeah. I really have just, and it's only been like literally like a week, but even in that short amount of time, I have really had to readjust my whole approach to men, reflect on what my goal is, like, why am I even talking to this person? How is this serving me? Is it serving me? What do I want out of this? Also, not, because the way, like, my style of sex work was, I'm going to tell you straight immediately, like, you're not even about to get my attention unless you give me money. So me completely changing that dynamic. So if I'm like DMing somebody and they're like, yo, what's good? Like, we should link up for dinner. Like, before I'll be like, oh, I charge for that. Period. Like, you know, but now it's like, but the thing is, dinner is a regular thing that people do. So I gotta be like, okay, let's have dinner, you know? So it's just been a lot of like restructuring, I think. Yeah.
How about your time? How has your time opened up in a different way? Do you have things that immediately went in to fill up your time and energy? Or do you find yourself with like, God, there's 7 hours here.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely another thing. And I was actually talking to my mom about that, is part of what I think sex work, part of how I think it was serving me was it was giving me human interaction. And I'm someone who, I'm in my house a lot. Everything I do, I work from home. My Patreon is from home. My Onlyfans is from home. I'm sitting home watching movies. I'm with my cats. When I have people come over, I don't really go out. Like, a lot of what I do is just in my house. And I love that. And I like to just be in my house. However, since I'm not doing full service sex work anymore, that decreases my human interaction largely, because pretty much everything else I do is solo, is by myself. So one of the things I've been talking to my mom about is replacing the human interaction or intimacy piece of that to still feel satisfied and not feel like I'm going to come out of retirement. Because what I have reflected on is one of the reasons that I was engaging in sex work, or one of the things that I got out of sex work, I would say, is the human interaction. Like, I'm going, and even though it's like one of my tricks, like, we're still going to cuddle and kiss, and oh my God, how was your day? And like, oh, you're, you know, whatever bullshit. And now I'm not doing that. So like, how can I replace that intimacy so I can still feel fulfilled as a human person, and not revert back to that? So I've been talking to my mom a lot about like, okay, I'm going to spend more time with my friends, or I'm going to try to create new relationships with men that don't revolve around sex work, or I'm going to pick up on or increase my intimate relationships with people who are not cishet men, you know, whatever the case may be. So I would say in terms of my time, that has been the biggest thing is for me is like human interaction and intimacy, and that's what I'm going to be missing. But otherwise, I don't, there's like nothing, because I'm just going to be watching like Netflix. But that has been the point like of reference for sure.
Yeah, and that's huge. I think for almost like everybody in the industry, we spend so much time working, and there are so many pluses to being at work. It, you know, depending on what part of the industry you're in, depending on what you can negotiate. If you are in that space and you enjoy it and you're getting a lot out of it, that usually that's what your friends are doing too. That's all your social relationships. So when you drop off, it's like you drop off the face of the plane. You're like, hey girl, you want to hang out? Like, no, I'm making money. What do you mean hang out?
Yes, that's definitely another thing, is like the homegirls that I do have down here, we're all hoes. So like when we link up, it's always like, so what are we getting into? What's about to be the, you know, even if it's just like, we're going to come to my house and like shoot content, you know, whatever. It's always on some hoe shit. So definitely that's a good point that you bring up, is like, now with my friends that I have, trying to broach the subject, I've been having a difficult time trying to broach the subject of like, I'm not selling pussy no more. Like one of my homegirls hit me the other day and was like, yo, I got a client, you know, doing whatever, come through. We're at the casino. And all I said was, I can't come out tonight, because like I couldn't figure out like in the moment how to be like, listen, bitch. So, you know, so yeah, like, so part of that is like me being ready to disclose that I'm not doing this shit anymore, which kind of sounds like it would be easy, but really it's not, if the relationship kind of like the friendship was revolving around our making money together. And then whether or not you can retain, is that the right word, those friends, because perhaps when I disclose I'm not doing a hoe shit no more, they're gonna be like, all right, bitch, well, that was the basis of our relationship. So then needing to find new friends, you know, so definitely, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a strange thing to network in our industry, you know, like in any side of the industry, and I always want to give credence to the fact that for whatever is hard for strippers, it's way fucking harder for full service sex workers or for
definitely.
sex workers, right? Can't make sense. Like this is like this tiny little corner that has like the most social credence, and it's still fucking hard and super stigmatized, and socializing and networking it's difficult, you know, like I've of playing another person who's sitting across the table from you, like, this is what I do, whole tone changes, right? Whole reality changes.
Absolutely.
It's such a real thing in building friendships in any side of the industry. And it makes you really wonder, like, this is what you're doing to me. And I pass as white, right? I have this, like, I speak like this. You don't know I'm an immigrant. You don't know I'm queer. You don't know all this stuff about me that you have all these judgments about. And somehow, just that little thing.
Right.
I see you.
Exactly. Right. So making civvy friends is like, what the fuck? What? What? Right. And for me, even though I'm not still currently doing full service sex worker, being a sex worker and just being a hoe in general is my brand and my being in my life. Like that, like me being a hoe and being like sexually liberated or whatever the fuck you want to call it, I prefer to say just being a hoe. That didn't start when I started my Twitter. Like that has just been, that's who I am. So it's not like, I don't know. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's very hard to like, it doesn't separate, and it shouldn't have
right.
to. But I think a lot of people would like to see it separate because it's more comfortable to be friends with
of course
parts of you that are what they like, right? Like
right. So if you're becoming my friend, you basically got to be down with the fact that I'm a hoe. Okay, I'm not selling pussy anymore, but I'm still a hoe, and you're still about to be associated with the hoe. So if you're not with that, we probably can't be friends. Period.
And that's a fucking awesome thing to hear. And I think for a lot of younger people struggling with that, it's so powerful to hear that phrasing because they might have never heard it before. And you're so allowed to do that, right? For so long, we're told like, you have to separate it. You have to be this person. And there are plenty of reasons to not be out or public. And there are people you for safety reasons, for whatever reason, if you have a reason, you don't have to disclose. But there are so many people too, that if you carry yourself that way and it's like practice, right? Like if you practice that entire lived existence, you're gonna find people who are cool with it, and it doesn't have to be as scary as like anyone you tell is gonna run off.
Yeah, it's so interesting because like I said, this is just who I have always been, and then I just was able to like create a brand off of it and monetize it and blah blah blah. But this is like, if I didn't have a Twitter or Instagram, I would still be sucking dick and shaking my ass on yachts and eating pussy. Like, I would still be doing that. So it's been so interesting for me to watch people's response to me and feel empowered by my existence, and hearing people like thank me for being so transparent and open and just unapologetic and fearless about who I am, and how that has helped them, you know, and because it like, that was never an option for me to not be. Again, I was raised in a family who was just like, okay, this is autonomy. You do what you need to do. Here's the possible consequences. What are you gonna do? Blah, blah, blah. You know, just very like, you know, when I was younger, when I got my period, we had a period party. When I got my first training bra, we had a training bra party. Like, so there's so many things for me. It was just like, this is what the fuck it is. So it's been, I feel very blessed that my, I guess, existence, which is natural for me, has been so helpful for other people to see. And even if they aren't sex workers, just, you know, being able to observe a woman who is like, orgasms, vagina, you know, whatever. So I feel very lucky.
Yeah, we're lucky to have it. We're so lucky to have you and to have spaces like this to chat, because you know, this is not new. I think like people in this space, liberated women, strong, like just strong beings, right?
Yeah.
Of any variation have been there. It's just that the spaces have not been made available for those conversations to be out and about. It has been censored for so long. And even now, right, we're seeing so much censorship in all these spaces that are supposed to be homes of free speech. And it very much centers around those identities that have been marginalized for a very long time.
Right.
The beauty is that when you make something that decentralized, what pops up is like, hey, this was around all along. And now here's in your face, and you can't ignore it, and you can't avoid it. And if you were looking for this, here it is, right? And that's, God, that's so powerful. Which brings me to the next conversation about money and retirement, because I think about this all the time. Like, there were people retiring from any area of this industry, you know, 500 years ago, 600 years ago, 300 years ago, and we still don't have the sales manuals of how to like work the steps, right? We don't have like personal financial management very available, and we don't have a lot of info on retirement, because like you said, once someone leaves, it's like, where did she go?
Right.
Exactly. Is she alive? And like these things get cut, and before, you know, when it was even more stigmatized, it's like you didn't even talk about doing it in the first place, so it's not like so in that process of going into retirement, into your exit strategy, do you have any role models or mentors that you were like, okay, this is the process? And if not, like what was your strategy for this one I want to get out?
In terms of like specifically monetary stuff?
Yeah. In terms of like having yourself set up for success for after, right?
I don't have any. I wish that I had a fucking mentor, or I wish that I had somebody who I was like, oh, this is the blueprint for it. And I feel like so many of us are doing a lot of these things on our own and just like winging it. And that's part of the issue. But I would say for me, I talked a lot with my dad, who doesn't really like, he knows that I'm like a hoe, but he don't really like no, but like he's in denial. But you know, he's a business owner. And so I talked to him from the perspective of being a business owner, even though he doesn't, whatever. My business owning is that I'm selling coochie. So, you know, and I be talking to him like, whatever, anyway. But I talk to him from the perspective, I be talking to him from the perspective of being an entrepreneur. And I'm just like, you know.
It is a business.
Right? And so for him, he grew up poor in Oakland, started by fucking like sweeping the floors in like an engineer studio, learned how to mix music, got into the music industry, built his own everything. Like he became a business owner and now has a really thriving and successful business in the music industry. And so I talked to him a lot about money management, taxes, blah, 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 shit that I don't, you know, that I was like, I don't know what? I don't know. Like I literally did whatever. So it has been in the past year. So, and this is, and I didn't really even say to myself, August is my hard stop date until maybe a couple months ago. But in the past year and a half, I think I realized, I guess maybe subconsciously, I was just like, you know, what would be the out? What is my out? What's on the other end? What the fuck am I even gonna, what? And so I started asking him questions about saving money and how do I better manage my money and how do I do this and how do I do that and what would a retirement plan look like for someone who doesn't have, and I don't even know all the fucking proper terminology for shit, but I just know, like, you know, if you're a teacher and you work for 30 years and you're done your job, then you still get checks or something. I don't know, like, they set you up for not having a job no more. But when you're a business owner, like, you don't have that. You either make money and save the shit or you about to be broke when you stop. So because he's doing that currently, I could have that conversation with him, like, all right, so what the fuck do I need to do? How do I start saving or how do I not? And so if I wouldn't call him my mentor, but I would just say I had a lot of little conversations with him, which moved me to start being more thoughtful about how I spend my money, being more thoughtful about what it means to save money, and chopping that up into goals and what's realistic and what will work and what won't. And there really was, and still isn't really like a template that I'm using. Like I said earlier, I'm just winging it, but those were kind of the steps that I took. And I also did, and I just want to say, as a sex worker, regardless of what kind of sex worker, it's really scary. And I want to acknowledge that it's really scary to go to like institutions like a fucking bank to try to have these conversations to get more knowledge. So it's almost like, you know, our isolation makes us more vulnerable to shit. You know, it's like, oh, I'm a sex worker, so I'm scared to go to the bank, so I'm not going to go to the bank, which means maybe I'll never learn about retirement saving, which means maybe I'll never retire, because how the fuck am I going to save up for retirement? You know what I mean? So I just want to acknowledge that, because I did go to a bank and I did try to have a conversation about like retirement and fucking, what is it called, when stocks and I don't know, all that, like interest rate and saving, you know, all of that. And I was so nervous the whole time that I didn't even really hear what the fuck he was saying, because all I kept thinking to myself was, he's had my bank account in front of him and he's gonna be like, well, bitch, where's all these cash, like, what is all this coming from? You know what I mean? And so I did that, but I totally acknowledge that that resource is just not going to be accessible for most of us. And even if it is, most of us, and not even just sex workers, don't even have, like, we're so poorly educated about money and money management and a lot of those words that it goes over our head, whether you're someone who's has hired, like, you know, I have a master's degree, so you think I would know blah, 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 but bitch, we don't know. I don't fucking know.
Yeah,
so
it's not, process isn't taught, financial literacy isn't taught. It's entirely in the home. And it benefits people who have had that in the home for a very long time. And for the vast majority of sex workers, we haven't. Our families, our friends have financial models that absolutely don't work. Even if theirs works for them, they're not business. So they're giving you advice for a 9-to-5er that ain't gonna apply to you. And most local resources, I mean, it is like shocking. It is dire, right? So like, I have been fixated on this for the last like few years. That's why Rackster just started, because of that specific, you know, like I set up an LLC and I, you know, push it into an S Corp and I get checks and I'm organized in this way and I did that. It took me so fucking long, and it's so many more years. And I lost so much money on stupid financial decisions. And I see people doing it every single day that aren't even aware that those decisions are costing them, right? Like the 100,000 under the mattress. This is like the stripper, like the stripper goes to heaven, right? I have $93,000 under my mattress. Like, okay, let's break down why that's a very dangerous thing. One, it's right? 2, you ain't paid taxes on it. You can't buy anything big with it. 3, you're losing money because it's depreciating every day that it sits under your mattress. 4, it could be making you money if you invested it correctly. Like 5, it's sitting there. That means it's going to go somewhere, and it ain't going to go into an investment account. It's probably going to go into a bill or a boyfriend or something else. But because we don't talk about it, these ideas, like money management, gets filled in with the advice of people who don't know much about it, who don't know anything about the industry, or worse, people who have a whole separate idea of what they think we should do with our money, which is usually like to them, right? And yeah, like that's one thing I'm like, I'm just done with. I'm like, no, we're talking about money. We're our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also being people who are femme, we are socialized to just not even talk about money anyway. Like most of us don't know about money. And then on top of that, if you are someone who is femme, it's like, bitch, don't ever bring up money. Right. You need to not know. Like, it's like, there's so much, because even in terms of like me doing full service sex work, a big part of that was me figuring out and learning and becoming comfortable with, or being comfortable with being uncomfortable with negotiating, talking about money. So for sure, you hit the nail on the head. And it's like, we do need more resources and the opportunity to talk more about this. I think for me, what I ended up doing and what led me to be able to retire and be comfortable in retirement is that I figured out how to monetize different things so that I had different sources of income that I know at least are going to keep are safe to keep going because they're not related to sex work. Because anything, this is again totally like where my mindset is. Anything related to sex work to me is temporary. Like even if it's not full service sex work shit, even if it's like many vids, Onlyfans, all that shit is temporary. So you got to be able to have money coming in from different places that you are pretty sure are going to continue to keep going. So I did that first, and I've been, and a lot of these things I was doing without the realization that it would help me for retirement. Like I was just doing it, and then it helped. So I did that process. I was like, all right, how can I make money that's outside of sex work? How can I make sure it's going to keep coming in? Boom. So I have income there. And then another thing was starting to save up my money. And what I learned about saving money is basically I got to like make back triple what I would like to save in order for me to still like maintain my own expenses. So if my expenses are $5,000 a month, I need to make like 15K a month in order to put away 10K, kind of a thing. And so figuring out how that is going to realistically look for me. And so I started doing that process, and then cutting down on things that I don't need to be spending money on all the time. Like I order Uber Eats a lot. I don't know why. And so I was like, bitch, you don't need to order Uber. And so I'm trying to limit that and just like be more smart about it.
But it's so good though, and it's right there.
Yeah, so that has been my process. And then I really didn't set like here's a certain amount before I retire. I really more so was looking at how I can continue to make money post-retirement. So I always did a thing where I was like, I need to keep a certain amount in my bank account. Like I can't go under 10K, I can't go under 20K, or can't go whatever. But it wasn't really that made me feel comfortable about retiring, because I feel like that could just be frozen at any fucking time. My thing was, how can I ensure that I have income that will continue to come to me after I retire? So those have been things that have been helpful for me, and where I am at with all of that. And writing down my expenses as well, like visually being able to see this is everything that's going out every month. So that means I need to, like I said, at least make double that. I would like to make triple that. You know what I mean? So it's a lot, and it's so unfortunate that we generally are so uneducated. And again, like I said earlier about something else, it's intentional that we are not, good with money. So, and I think specifically for sex workers, because this is like such a fickle industry, we really would benefit a lot from more productive conversations about money and security.
Absolutely. And one more thing that you pointed out, and that is so important, is not get caught up on the terms around it, and not get caught up on so much of this language stuff is just meant to keep you up. All it's doing is making it harder to understand some really simple shit, right? If you want more money, make more, spend less, manage less. It's that simple. Right. And you can learn more about it, and you can learn how to speak in those terms, but it's so important to realize, like, look, you have a master's degree, I have a BA, like we both have backgrounds where we had all this privilege in learning about communication and rhetoric and speech and like analytical thinking. And if you didn't have that, a ton of people who are multimillionaires, who are fantastically well off financially, also didn't have that and might not even be able to talk that way. So don't get sold on the idea when you walk into a bank, if you don't understand what, different types of mortgages are, or if you don't understand how an interest rate works, that doesn't mean you can't be in control of it. And you can't let other people tell you that you're not educated enough, because you absolutely have the resources to do it. If you can calculate just what you make in a night, like think about how much like you said, we negotiate with customers, we talk shop, we sell, that we have this whole process. If you're capable enough to do that, which everyone watching this is going to be, you are absolutely capable of managing finances.
And I think that what you just said is important, because it doesn't have to be this really big and scary process, and it can, you also have to cater it to you and your life. You know what I mean? So of course, like when I think about making money, I'm thinking about people who make way more money than me, and I'm like, oh, I wish I had this and I could do it like this, and they probably have a fucking financial advisor who's helping them and blah, blah, blah. But like, no, bitch, that's not my situation. So I'm going to cater it to me. And for people who are listening to this who aren't in my situation, you got to cater it to you, and being realistic about what your expenses are. And my cat, move. Being realistic about what your expenses are. And also, I think something that's important, that I feel is important for me to bring up, is that I am privileged in that I don't have kids. I come from a family that has, even though their money spending wasn't great, they have money. You know, I was never impoverished, or, you know, what have you. So I also want to bring up that everybody's money situation is going to look different. And also that, like, you can do your best, and also there are so many systems in place that are going to continue to try to keep you down regardless. And so recognizing that as a reality and how that will play into your life, I feel like it's important, because there are some people who will do their best and get all the knowledge and do all their savings and do all their Googles and do whatever, and still be in this cycle of being marginalized. So I want to say that too, because I feel like some of the people who I engage with who are doing like survival sex work, for instance, it's like sometimes when I talk to them about certain things, I just feel like I need to tell myself to shut up, because it's like, that's not even their situation at all. You know what I mean? So like me being like, oh, just save this and do that. Like, no, bitch, that's not what the fuck, that's not realistic. So I feel like everyone needs to recognize that, and also just kind of cater things to what is realistic in their life.
Absolutely. And cater the success mark to your own life and reality, because it's so dangerous to cater it to someone else's. And this goes both directions. I see it in that direction where people get really defeated or upset because they see someone else at a level of success that might be part is hard work and effort, but part of it is just circumstances and genetic lottery and educational lottery, and all these things are out of control. And I see it in that direction, but the one that really gets me, and that I think is so important to point out, is content creators, educators, anyone who's positioning themselves as a teacher in this space has to be extremely aware of how they talk about those situations and about the lived reality of the audience that they're speaking to.
Yes.
Shaming people for what they make, trying to make them feel guilty for their earning potential, what's in their savings account. It's such a lack of awareness, of empathy, and it can be so harmful to someone to see that, and to be, I mean, it's a slap in the face, you know, it's a slap in the face to somebody who is doing their best, trying their hardest, and has all the shit on their plate that you have never dealt with, have never lived through. So it's so important for anyone who's creating content. And I think now that it's all so digitized and so widespread, you don't have to have a massive audience and a following and all this shit to be a content creator. If you're putting stuff out there, just be aware that your audience, you don't know who you're talking to. You know, it's a bunch of people who are looking at a screen. Do your best to be understanding, because that can absolutely, I think, hurt someone who might be doing their absolute best.
I try to do my best, and I try to always include some self-drags. Like you said something earlier about part of it is just luck, or, you know, and being privileged, and bitch, that's for sure. Like, I always try to make it clear that yes, I'm smart, and yes, I'm like funny and blah, 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 but also I am light-skinned, I'm conventionally attractive, you know, I came from a family with money, I came from a family that all had higher education degrees, so that means that I was probably gonna have a higher, like, so hell yeah, the half of what the fuck I'm doing is not just because I work so hard, it's because that was what the fuck it was gonna be, and I try to be very honest about that. And I always try to encourage people to drag me whenever possible when I need to address and check the shit that I'm talking about, because that's the only way that I'll learn. And, you know, I'm trying to be a better person. So when I say, I feel like I feel like I've been trying to make that part of my brain, or that it is part of my brain, is like, if I'm doing something that is not realistic or inclusive in a way that is realistic, like, let me know, because
right.
I am a fucking light-skinned privileged person.
I don't want to be this idea of, because you're talking about something that means you're the absolute expert. Absolutely not. We're talking
right.
Like life. You know more about your life and your reality. And if a concept, an idea, an argument runs up against it, my 100%, let me know. What I always say is, any argument, any position, any thought can be 100% wrong. You're welcome to beat me up on it. Do it in a respectful kind of way, right? Because we want, like, for especially Brax Rich's space, I'm so big on, look, let's treat each other like people. You wouldn't talk to me like that if we were not in this space. So let's do it in a way where everyone can recognize it in themselves, because it's not just me, right? If I have that privilege, or I'm coming from that space, let me know and help me do it so that everyone in the space who's in a similar position can understand it. And isn't just like, you were mean, I don't want to listen. Like, no. People respond so emotionally to things that are very true to them, right? And making space for them to have that emotion, to go through that process, that's what opens up the conversation to, like, oh, that was stupid. That was some dumb shit I was on. Okay, let's move on and let's move forward. So I want to transition into the last section that I thought would be really interesting to talk about. I've had a couple of people reach out to me on this. I have some ideas from a marketing perspective. I don't have any real life experience in this, so I thought you might be a great person to ask. I've had a couple people go, okay, I talk about the sales cycle at the club, right? And it's so fucking easy, because they're literally right there, right? You're paying the club to do your marketing, AKA you show up and there's a room full of people like, do you want some money? Do you want it? Right? And you're just picking up the Easter eggs, right?
Right.
And that could not be more different for full service sex workers, because advertising is so limited. The spaces you can go in and chat about work are so limited. You know, I've talked to friends who are in Vegas, like, just even being out in the city is so criminalized that for some people, it's like, I can't even go into a casino, right? Like, I'm just afraid that I'm going to get arrested. I'm afraid I'm going to be caught in a sting. So with that reality, especially in the US, but all over the world, you know, there are people from all over the world who reach out like, hey, I'm working through my sales process. What can full service sex workers do to improve their pipeline, to get more sales, to get people coming to them, and to get customers in as safe of a way as possible?
Yeah, so I think that there's so many things, and that's like such a big question. I think it first depends on what kind of full service sex work you're going to be doing. So like, whether you're a street-based sex worker, or whether you're going to be like posting ads online and shit, or, you know, and it's part of this conversation is why, like, the shutting down of Backpage is so unfortunate, because Backpage made vetting and safely increasing your sales essentially easier for people who have less access, and now that doesn't even exist. But for people who have the ability to, the funds to pay for ads, I would say that's a lot of the posts. I don't post ads. I tried to post ads before and they wouldn't let me for some reason. I don't fucking know why. But what I have observed, and based on what I have talked about with other people, is that posting ads is really a successful way to build up your client base. And what you can do in order to figure out what sites that you may or may not use is you can Google like escort Miami, escort Fort Lauderdale, escort Florida, you know, whatever city you're going to be in or are going to, and see what sites pop up, so you can understand like those are the sites that people are going to be looking at locally. And then of course there's the bigger sites, Eros, Tryst, shit like that, for you to post on and push your sites. A lot of those places charge for ads, so be mindful that that's probably going to be happening. And I would say, other than that, I tell a lot of people, and I encourage a lot of people to do their research. Just like this is the service and the product. And just like any other business, they're going to be doing like market research about like, oh, how much does this cost? And I want to have a competitive rate, and how are they doing it? And how could we do it? How could we amplify, So I always encourage people to figure out what kind of product it is that you're selling, being mindful of where your positionality is in terms of how you'll be able to sell your product, and doing research on people who are like you and people who have been successful who are like you and how they've done it. And a lot of full service sex workers who have access to the internet, they use Twitter, right? They utilize hashtags, fly me to you, date DC, date Miami, whatever. And you can go to their pages and see how they've been running things and model it after that. And I think a lot of it is really trial and error, right? Because there are some people who that process is going to be really successful, and for some people it's not. So for me personally, for instance, I don't post ads. I literally do all my shit off Instagram. And I don't even, my Instagram is not like a sex worker Instagram. It's like sex education, my brand or whatever, but I'm still doing shit, or was doing shit through there. You know what I mean? So figuring out what's going to work for you. And like we kind of talked about earlier, not comparing yourself to other people, but just using that as a point of reference for perhaps things to pull from can be really useful. And I think another thing in figuring out the product that you're selling is understanding who your market is and what will appeal and draw that to you. So for a lot of, I see a lot of full service sex workers who change their language around. They call themselves companions or providers, right? As opposed to me, I'm just like, I'm a prostitute, because that's whatever. So, because their clientele would not like that, but their clientele likes the idea of a companion or whatever. And then they build websites where they talk about the benefits of having a date with a companion, and we're going to leisure, and we're going to talk about politics, but then that has proven successful as their market and demographic. They've hit the nail on the head, and that's how they continue to make money or increase their sales. So for me, it's just like I post a picture of my ass and an athlete DMs me and I'm like, bitch, here's the rate, here we go. I'm sucking dick. You know what I mean? So, but again, trial and error, and also me, I recognize this is my market and that's not my market, or, so I think that full service sex workers need to approach this just like any other business would, and really think about business and how businesses function, and apply that to how they're doing their own shit. I'm trying to think of other things that increase fucking sales. Oh, I think another thing is networking with other hoes, because and I think we talked about this earlier, that like networking within this industry is looks much different than in other places. But what was really helpful for me starting out and then continuing was knowing other hoes and them being like, oh bitch, he's got a bag, make sure you DM him or whatever. And now that I'm in the position of having multiple people that I know, I'm doing that for people who are trying to get on. I'm like hitting my homegirls like, bitch, I'm out, but you need to hit him up because he's, whatever. So, and of course that, that networking process is going to look different for everyone, obviously. But like I spoke about earlier, building community and support, that can be so helpful in word of mouth and figuring out who is what and what is who, and also who to stay away from and how to not fuck up your sales. You know what I mean? So, there's that too.
And so much of this in any side of the industry, it's people. You're just talking to people, right?
Yeah.
Money isn't coming out of nowhere. You're trying to get money from people. You're networking with other people. So all the same principles of human behavior, right? Like I see so much of the sort of cutting in or cutting people out of sales or being overly aggressive on an approach, and it's you're making short-term money by cutting out that potentiality, because like, oh, you told such a good Twitter story about someone that you brought on one of your many adventures, and it was someone who just at every step of the way just made poor decisions, right?
Yeah.
That type of decision making, that means you're never getting a call back. Like you're never going to touch that money again. And a lot of times in this industry, like it's fun and we're partying and it's a blast, but like watch your behavior. Be aware that it might not look like a suit and tie networking event, you could be shaking ass with butt plugging you're networking, right? Like remember what the fuck you're there for and what you're doing, what your purpose is. And then those professional contacts just feel so much easier to like hit you up again. Like, hey, remember when we got all that money and it was super fun and we like dipped out like doctors at the end, like pros? Yeah, call me again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely thinking about, based on who your clientele is, catering that knowledge to how you're going to be acting and right. So it's interesting because it's really redefining what professionalism looks like in our industry and how that's going to look. Because just like you say, yeah, bitch, we're turning up, but also like I'm trying to create a long-lasting relationship with this person so I can continue to have access to their money. And again, that's going to look different for every type of provider. You know, again, for some people, that's going to be like being able to hold certain kind of conversations and, you know, being acting as a therapist in a way, providing emotional labor and blah, blah, blah. For other people, it's just going to be like coming in, sucking dick and leaving niggas alone. So yeah, definitely that's important. And I also want to say just about the money piece is that everything is, like I've already said, is trial and error, but I feel like what has been helpful for me in terms of making money is when I always had like a rate that I wanted to get. And I try my best to always stick to that just for consistency purposes. However, I also would like often ask myself, what do I need out of this? What do I want out of this? And so sometimes if that means that I walked away with $300, then I walked away with $300. And as opposed to other times when I'm going to walk away with $1,500, you know what I mean? So, and being okay with that or recognizing what I need at the time, like, okay, do I need a bill paid right now? Or I'm going to get this $150 to get my bill paid then. So that as well. And I think once, depending on where you are in your sex work, that will shift, you know what I mean? Because when you start to make more money, you can say to more people like, nah, I'm good, because you're not living up to that. But no matter where you are in it, it's like, it's okay to kind of change that and let that ebb and flow based on your needs. And that's also a good way, because, you know, having somebody in your life who's like, oh, I'm gonna just pay your phone bill every time I see you. Okay, you're getting your phone bill paid. So maybe that's not $1,000 rate and blah, 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 but that's one expense that you no longer have to take care of. So, you know, just like, I guess, diversifying the way in which you get your money and understanding that it's okay to do it in multiple ways and figuring out what you need, and not being too militant about this is my rate, because you might be losing out on other consistent money.
Yeah, I love that. And like, keeping it honest with yourself, with your time. And, you know, because I hear this, especially in the stripping world, like, well, my rate is $800 an hour. Well, you've been at the bar for 4 hours texting your ex. You haven't worked the floor. If he doesn't want to pay $800, he has a lot more negotiating power than you do. So if he says no, and then you walk into the locker room to complain for 4 more hours, you're only hurting you, right? Someone else might take him to a room for $400, but guess what? If she was on the floor for the last 4 hours and then is on the floor for 4 more hours and she's making $200 an hour, she's still massively out earning whatever this idea, this notion in your head, right? And I think because especially these conversations around, you know, shaming other people for making less, or because of the whole social conversation of bragging and of like, this is what I make and you don't make it, like, oh, that's, I could talk about that forever, but what that does is it really impacts, I think, people's short-term and long-term vision on their money. And they get caught up in the idea of always having to get that rate, or it being an ego thing. And it can't be an ego thing. You gotta be logical and rational. And there's times, like, one of my things is always ask for more, right? I'm always gonna ask you for some stupid money. I don't get it every time. I don't get it most times. That's why I always ask, right? For every person who's there who's gonna give you $5,000, $10,000, whatever, there's going to be someone that you have to tooth and nail for that little $100.
Correct.
There's 3 people in the bar. Is your time better spent complaining that there isn't a $1,000 customer, or getting that $100, right? Like, that idea of the ego as like, you're making me feel bad. Like, nah, you're there to work, you know what I mean? And I love that. Rate, want, need. Like,
yeah.
show up with all three in your pocket, you know?
And I think also what was important for me in that was, can I walk away from this still feeling okay with myself? Can I walk away still feeling whole or sane or whatever the case may be? Because, and I also acknowledge that not everybody has the privilege to be able to do that. But for me, it's like, there are some situations where I'm like, no, bitch, if I would have walked away without $1,000 and I did that, I would have felt like shit about myself. And I would rather feel fine with myself than walk away with $1,000 and feel less, you know what I'm saying? And feel bad. Does that make sense? So like, I tried to do a lot of like, what is going to make me feel okay with what just happened. And that's not to say horrible shit is happening. I'm just saying, like, if I'm going to sit here and be talking to this nigga for a fucking hour about his life and, oh my God, his baby mama, okay, this is what the fuck I want out of this to make it feel like it was beneficial to me. Like, and so walking away from it like that, which opens me up to the ability to make a variety of amounts of money, not just $1,000 only, right. Boom. Because, and what I have experienced is like, some people, if my rate is $1,000, for instance, some people, I really did work for that $1,000. Like that full hour was spent working for that fucking money. But other people, it's like 5 minutes and we're in and we're out, we're done. So it's like, bitch, I'm okay with $300 for that. I'm okay with a little $250, you know what I mean? So it's just, I feel like what I have learned over the years of doing full service sex work is, of course, it's important to have your rate, and of course, it's important to have consistency and blah, blah, blah. Also, and not but or either or, and keep your mind open to different amounts of money so that you're still bringing in shit, and you're, like I said earlier, respecting that little $150 tipper, that $150, $100 per, okay, he's gonna be consistent with his little $100. So you gotta take the $100 then. Like,
only the money that's left on the table because of that pride, that principle, that like that idea of you thinking someone else in the room cares about what you're doing, cares about your money, where you're the only person in that room, you know,
right.
Whatever space it is, it could be a room full of people. In the middle of the negotiation, you're the only one who benefits or loses. So right. Just being self-aware and making it about you and your needs, because no one else is with you at the end or at the beginning. Like the whole, it's your experience, right? When you retire, were you like, my 5 girlfriends, what are they gonna think about my performance? Like, you're an MVP to you. You're a fucking MVP, like, period. Right. Thank you so much. This was awesome. I really